Welcome, real estate rock and rollers. So you want to be a rock and roller? Well, this is where the action takes place, and what a week and a half that we've had. Here we are, right on the end, through what I refer to as the springboard of Rocktober. And all of you would know that I've been banging on like there's no tomorrow about building your APS list to around 25 plus. We've seen some extraordinary results coming from this. Even just the other day, and some of you are starting to graft. It's been a gentle reminder for several, even those that have been around for some time, to just lock on. What you need to recognize as a sales professional that's been around for a while is that you most likely, compared to other agents that are out there, are professionally fit. Even if you haven't seen this terrain that you're seeing in and around the market, and some of it is, well, it's unprecedented. When you look at the advent of COVID, just remember that you have that advantage. And if anything, and I found myself reminding just a leader of this just today, and that is that what you need to do is sometimes extract yourself from the business of listing and selling real estate and have a look at it from the outside. The analogy I use over and over again, if you're watching a sporting game, we're sitting back in the armchair, and it's so easy for us, even though we've probably never coached that sport, it's quite obvious where the problems lie when you look at something from the outside. So give yourself a fresh perspective and stand back and have a look. So just following on from what we talked about over the last couple of weeks, we said that Rocktober is basically the platform by which you bounce into not just this quarter, but set up for the new year ahead. Obviously, there's going to be that festive break in the middle. And last week we talked about, as you build that APS list in setting up, utilizing Rocktober as the springboard that sets you up for this quarter and of course next year. And we talked about the pre-list of APS, of actually servicing all of those active property sellers with, I guess, an entree of what your product is about. This is notably a standout with the Property Seller's Research Guide, where you make it clear that it's not necessarily about price, it's about satisfying motives. That's really your role. That yes, you do have a role as it relates to price or a value around the property in ensuring that market value is the number. There'll be lots more on this as we start to move through this, certainly next year, because I'm noticing that because the market's been so good, there's a lot of sellers that unfortunately are making a nutty assumption that the market's going to kind of stay static. So when agents are at them all the time talking about a lack of stock and property selling quickly and prices are being obtained, a lot of sellers sort of sit back and go, well, that's the easy part. We tend to forget about their motive. And then invariably when they do come on, because they're running the assumption that every agent's going to achieve the same outcome, they are sometimes left to just negotiate in and around your fees and or the marketing investment that you might be making. So if you're having any trouble with this, please just take some time and go back into studying it. And importantly, just get your head around the fact that if fee is coming up, the answer is not to reach for a reduction, not to start reconfiguring how you set stuff up, but instead understanding that they can't see the value, that the value proposition in one way, shape, or form has been partially lost, and you have to put a focus back into that. So that was that, and we're going to, I'll allude to that all the way through. I hope that you've got those 9 steps fairly clear. I will reiterate those as we get toward the end of what I want to talk about here inside of this short session. But the big issue here is what we call Nocember. So often I see this, especially if you're working with a sales associate, that we can make the mistake, and I see this not just for us, it begins with the people that we deal with. So if you add on to the fact that we've had lockdown in a lot of areas, we've had the restrictions that COVID-19 has presented. So a lot of property sellers have already delayed. We've had the spring season and some of them are standing back and saying, well, not until I find something, or I'll just leave it to next year. If you now couple that with the fact that we are at the end of October, November's about to come up, some people start to think Christmas really in early November. And certainly if you go into some of these department stores, they're often playing Christmas carols before you even get started. So that's a scary thing too. And we have to overcome this. The sellers need to know that we are still able to sell properties, they're still able to buy properties, and everything moves forward. So it is that we want to overcome this blockage that presents itself, because certainly as people, the moment they hear the word December, it can be a non-event month. For a lot of people, they just completely delay it. You have to get the message across that we sell properties all the way up until Christmas Eve. In fact, the record for me was 3 sales that I personally made on one Christmas Eve. I'd regularly made sales. Then as a team, I think the most we made was half a dozen or something like that. Can't quite remember, I only focused on my own stuff. But it goes all the way up until. Yes, you'll have a lot of other services like solicitors and all that sort of stuff that they might decide to call it quits early. Doesn't matter. All we have to do is get a clear understanding, a clear dissemination around our active property sellers. So I was talking to Sean Donovan this morning. He's on here, and he was telling me that his active property seller list is now up to around 60. That's between this quarter and next quarter. I hope that you've built your list. If you haven't, go back to previous recordings, focus on building that list up, whether it's you from old clients, whether it's going back into recent sales inquiry, whether it's centrally focusing your stuff around your service area. That's important. The identification is the most important thing. Once you've identified them, we then move these in to our pre-list phase and make sure that they're seeing the value, all of the things that we talked about, and I'll reiterate that in just a second. And that we then engage in conversations that are conducive to us figuring out where they sit. So the first thing that I talk about, this is more on a sales team leadership level. I said you've got to get, now that you've got your APS list, what we now want to delve into is the motive. We want to get a better understanding of where they're sitting in and around motive. So the first question you have to ask, and I have alluded to this in previous discussions, is looking at that list, we come in and we say, what or where is the active property seller trying, what are they trying to do, or where are they trying to go? So we want to get to that. I guess it's sometimes I refer to it as the superficial motive. It won't be the exact motive, but it'll give you an idea. And we want to make the conversation centric to that, because this is key. Once you can establish the motive, we know where they're going, then we can start to build the product around that and make it work. The second question we then have is, why is the seller looking to do this? Now, again, this is not an interrogation. We're not looking at the seller and saying, why are you trying to do this? What we're doing is we're asking this inside of those conversations. And what I'm often looking for is pushback. So sometimes when I say, well, why would you want to do that? I say it with a kind of disdain, as though, what on earth would you want to do that for? And if they sort of bite back at me and say, because, and they've got a strong reason around that, that tells me that that motive is strong. And it tells me that I'm on the way to maybe looking at getting this property not only on the market, but in the space of actually being able to sell it. So for example, if I said to them, you know, why would you want to do that? They said, well, I've always wanted to move there. And at the moment, what I'm seeing inside the market, if I don't do it now, it looks like I'll never do it because prices are escalating away. Again, doesn't really matter about the ins and outs of that. Just that response to the question tells me that this seller is definitely got plans around it. Of course, they might say, well, I have to move there for a job transfer. That's an obvious one. Now's the right time. I want to take advantage of the market. So all of this conversation is conducive to me saying, okay, which side of Christmas? Because all I'm trying to figure out, this leads to the last question, when must the property seller do this by? And as that conversation develops, and if I feel comfortable with what I'm doing and saying to them, I'll just say to them, you know, do you have to be moved before or after Christmas? I might even say to them, hypothetically speaking, if I had a buyer for you right now, ready to go, how would you feel about that? They say, well, that'd be just fantastic. I would move. Bang. That's a before Christmas. If they say, oh, I'm not real fussed because I can't find anything to go, that might be one that we're moving to after Christmas. And you need to figure out where they sit inside this equation. If you've got that active property seller list in order, you've got all that figured out, you can now make the bold move of writing off December. You see, what I prefer to do is establish the parameters clearly in the minds of those sellers that have indicated to me that they want to move before Christmas, that really from the 1st of Nocember, we've got that all the way through to roughly the 20th of December or thereabouts. So I effectively say to them that Nocember is basically a 7-week month. We've got about 50 days. So this is more than ample to get property on the market, get people in and make the whole thing take shape. So it is that we want to, and I will, for those of you that asked me to do it, this idea was spawned yesterday, I should say, by Glenn Taylor, who's over there in Whangaparoa, and he was saying to me, mate, can't you give me some sort of letter of recommendation or something like that, you know, when I'm talking directly with clients, that put me in a position where I'm re-engaged with them. And if it kind of comes from you as a recommendation, that can spawn or initiate the process where they jump on board. Absolutely. So of course, if you're on board with our Real Estate Rockstar program, you want that, I'll give it to you. I'll do anything, as you know, for a listing to get that in order and make that work. So we really need to get all that in place, but please do not lose sight of the fact, yes, the conversation has to be engaging. Yes, we have to have a premise of that conversation taking place. I can now reveal to you the reason that I have been saying over and over again that you need to build that APS list to a minimum of 25 is because, assuming you're working a 5-day week, once you've got that list in order, in terms of a daily basis, that means that there are 5 at least people that you can engage in good conversations about coming to market. And from here, we just want to identify which ones we need to be speaking to and which ones we need to go out there and talk to. If your list is not at 25, I've got to tell you this, the reality is you need to focus on presence marketing. You need to come back and look at either foothold or traction strategies, although you should always be looking at traction strategies anyway, but foothold strategies in terms of your prospecting and lifting your presence marketing inside that service area. Once you're past 25, we can focus on this to seed the listings. And once we get those listings in place, we'll just start leveraging 1 to 2, 2 to 4, and so on. So it is that we need to get all of that in order. And then what you need to simply do, and this is on a local basis, it doesn't matter if you're working inside an office that we work with or not. Once you've established this, we then set our holiday break up. You know when that is. You're going to work all the way through to the 20th. When you're off, you're off. And then all we're doing is going through that list and categorizing those that need to sit in the before Christmas category, those are the after Christmas category, and we communicate and send our service orientation out according to that list. So if I had someone that was sitting in the after Christmas and I was absolutely sure that's where they're going to be, I'm not focused on upping the ramping up of the 9 steps that sit inside what we refer to as our pre-list APS activity. But of course, if they're this side, well, I'm going to hurry that up and bring that in a retracted mode because I want to get these properties on the market. So very simplistic. I would, and I've got to tell you this, to anyone that was telling me that they are selling this side, I would be very quick to tell them that I've written December off and we call it Nocember, that we are working all the way up until these are the parameters that sit around, and yours is a property that I've decided to get set prior to Christmas. How do you feel about that? They say they're okay. Well, then you just grab them by the hand and we push them into the play of running the activity accordingly. So then all you need to do is then come back down once you've got those key dates all worked out. You know that when the end of the year is, you know when your break's going to be. I ask you, I implore you to get your head around this. When you're on, you're on. When you're off, you're off. You've got your APS list. All you've got to focus on now is disseminating which is going to sit this side, which is going to sit after Christmas. We now have the action plan set up and in order. All you now need to do is sit down and set your goals and targets for that month. Now, let me share something with you. I know that you guys have been in the business for a long time, and I don't want to make it sound condescending like I'm talking to newbies or rookies, but sometimes we forget. If you don't have a destination set, if you're just doing what a lot of people do in this business and seeing how it goes, well, then it will come, your results will come as a complete surprise. But I find it fascinating if you preset your goals and targets moving forward and you have a destination, well, then as we're progressing through Nocember, you can measure how far you've come, how far you've got to go. And this little, the gray matter here will focus on this almost invariably for you. So before we start, before we hit next week, which is the 1st of November, the 1st of November, be very clear on your goals and targets. Your goal quite simply needs to be, as we've always done with goals, benchmarked against the previous year. So if you're on board with what we did last November, you could just look back at those numbers and use that as a reference guide. However, I recommend that if you're brand new, if you haven't done this before, that your goal, considering that the goal has to be mandatory, in the same way you can't get someone half pregnant, or there's no such thing as half a goal, you either score it or you don't. Goals are mandatory by their very nature, so they need to be conservative. But you do need to set these at about 1.5 times what you normally do. So the goal needs to be as the barest of minimums, at least that's what you would have for an ordinary month, and half as much again. Because what we're trying to avoid, the reason that we bring Nocember into vogue is that one or the other is usually quite ordinary. So sometimes November goes off, or sometimes December's okay. But when you combine the two, it's fairly ordinary. By bringing them into one, we're looking at having one great, fabulous month. And it needs to be about 1.5 times what you normally do. As far as the target goes around that, that can be largely aspirational, as I've always said, because the target is something you take aim at, but don't necessarily hit. So for that reason, it can be aspirational. But do be very heavy with yourself and set that target before you start. If you don't know where you're going, how can you possibly know how far you've come or how far you've got to go? It's not that I want you to put pressure on yourself. It's that I want you to be clear about where you're driving this. So if you know the goal and you totally understand it, we can drive our activity in and around that. Then once we've got all that in order, we then need to probably, as we hit December, as we hit Nocember, I should say, as we come into it, hopefully you've already, through conversations, been able to disseminate which of those are before and which of those are after Christmas. But if you jump on board with this, I will give you a letter that you can then send to them that just asks the question, do you have to do something now? Or you can even verbalize this, which I find much more helpful, because if somebody says to me, no, I'm definitely okay till after Christmas, I can then push my attention to those people that are sitting before Christmas. And then finally, all you want to set up is what I call the fab listings. So if you've got listings on board now, some of which have been hanging around despite the fact that the market's been relatively undersupplied, I would pay a lot of attention to where the price expectation is right now and maybe have that conversation with those people about lowering that expectation. Now, of course, if those sellers were saying to me, you know, that they have to sell at a certain number, I would then be giving them the speech. If you want to get this done before Christmas, because who's to say how the market's going to look after? And I would be, you know, engaging in all of the things that we do around R2Ss. Although this year, I don't think that's a big deal because most properties seem to be moving. And then last, but by no means least, I then just want, once I've got that all in order, I'm now setting in train my pre-list APS activity. And I said I would reiterate this. I just want to go through it at the risk of sounding like a broken record. It's the most important thing that you can do. So anyone that sits on there, even if I've only met them early, I will be sending them out the Property Sellers Research Guide. If you don't have a Property Sellers Research Guide, or you don't have one handy right now, you need something straight away, in just the same way that I said to Glenn, I'm more than happy to get some sort of letter out there that is introductory to reconnect you with those sellers, allow them to understand that you're ready to go despite whatever lockdown constraints have been in order. Bit of a build up that I can give you because you're personally known to me, and some sort of accreditation to get that re-engagement going. Once that's been established, you can then move to SMSing in them your results and make sure that they are receiving those texts and they understand what's going on. So in real time, you're telling them about property sales as they're occurring. We then move into the preliminary CMA. Now, I've got to tell you, the comparative market analysis sent out as a preliminary that is completely devoid of your opinion, that goes with the cover letter that echoes the sentiments of the Property Sellers Research Guide, making it clear that it is only comparative value. This is a subjective opinion and just a basis or a platform by which you can engage in discussions. It is devoid of your opinion because you say to them, look, my role is really taking care of market value, which is what you receive. You won't be receiving comparative value. What you eventually get in your hand is market value. And my job is to make the bigger number bigger, which is what you get. Don't focus too much on the small number. And be getting that out. This again is a good platform for discussions. The next one is to make sure that you are getting these people along, that you are inviting them to look at other similar properties that are on the market, hopefully at the same time looking at your welcome home. Now, I know not everyone is now open to those welcome homes going on. You can still modify one of your invitations if you've got something that's new to market and ask them to come and have a look at it for comparison's sake. Ideally, however, you want to invite them to come along and have a look at your open home in play. In fact, I was just talking this morning with Kelly Canara, who is the sales team leader of quite a large team and a large real estate agency. And we've made it our focus to actually not just study the competitions open for inspections, but we're resolved to have an open for inspection, or a welcome home, as we call it, that completely outplays the competition. I've got to tell you, this is the initial port of call for prospective sellers. Again, this is an opportunity for you to showcase the value proposition. And the more they see in value, the less cost becomes an issue. So this is also important. Then moving to the two-view platform. I think most of you that are on, well, if you're on board with Real Estate Rockstar, you've actually got access to two-view inside of the Property Marketer Suite. I know that Stuart Hatfield, who works with Ange Seralis, he sends these out all the time. It's just become part of a process, and that's why I've put it in here. If they can see this as yet another example of your marketing, yes, it's a bit of an ego tickle in that it's a subdomain that utilizes their property address as the call-in. You can give this to them free of charge if there's something that you're offering that maybe your competition isn't. Again, I think it's a highlight. Sometimes we look at these things and we just think that's a given. But what I keep trying to tell real estate agents is you have to look at yourself the way that those active property sellers are seeing you, and therein will lie the answer. This is where the key for them kicks in. Next thing is to send out your newsletter, or what we call the Market Roundup. Again, a very simplistic document. I want to hasten to add something here that I often forget to do, and agents forget about it. So I'll talk to them about their newsletter, and I say, yeah, we've been meeting, we missed last month, or something like that. Understand this. That newsletter needs to arrive on the same day every month. If you embrace the idea of putting a market roundup out, it needs to be there every single month on the same day, reliably and consistently. It's for this reason that I say you can also keep it lean. People don't read. It's not how comprehensive it is. It's whether or not it's there, and it's whether or not it's easy for people to glean information from. Always remember, with something like that newsletter, you are competing with any number of other products, with any number of other businesses. Everyone's got a newsletter. And it's only when that active property seller, again, is active. I know that some of them may glean an in dormancy, but you shouldn't have an expectation as to whether or not they're going to read it, but you do want to have it there. So if you embrace this, embrace it properly. So I say it doesn't need to be comprehensive. It just needs to be simple. Up the top, in less than 100 words, you basically need to tell them the condition of the market, how you see it. Obviously, I would recommend that you put a positive slant on that. You then need to have a smattering of sales. I think a maximum of 15, but sort of around, 8 would do. And make sure that you highlight some recommendations. As I have alluded to, in the new year, as part of Prospector 4, we are also putting a Ready Reckoner on there, which will actually talk about what the cash rates are, allow you from your data supplier to put in what the clearance rates are, number of properties listed, number of properties sold, all those sort of stats in a quick reference guide. I think this is handy if people can just glance at it and it becomes relatively informative. The next thing I talked about was accolades, and I did make this big point. Even if you go back on previous recordings I've had here, I spent a half an hour talking about the importance of those recommendations and how they figure in. And I want to thank you again, Glenn, for bringing it to my attention that I can give you some accolades. I can give you some sort of accreditation by virtue of the fact that you act as a real estate rock star. And if we push that out there, I'm not going to say real estate rock star, but if I can position you as a consummate professional, definitely I'd be looking at positioning you as the beyond comparison, beyond compare agent. And given that accreditation, I think this will make a big difference, because if you come to a seller and you're recommended by a third party, I think that holds a lot of weight. The case studies, I think at the moment, are absolutely imperative. We utilize that, which is one of the big things that I was saying again to Ange Seralis. And the reason I highlight this one with Ange is because he successfully marketed, sold, and listed from the buyer that bought this one another property, and then sold that without actually meeting any of the owners, and the buyer not even looking at a property. This is just fantastic fodder for a case study, particularly when you couple that with the marketing product that you use. And if you can push this in front of your active property sellers, you're making the decision for them even easier to jump on board, and you're probably negating the need to explain and or defend fee. While I'm on that, if any of you are having trouble with the negotiation of fees and charges, I've just spent, I think we're up to the 6th week of training that I've done on a Friday, where I just start, for me, get out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning and run the training from 7 a.m. and have done for that 6 weeks. And everything is about the procurement of listings at an undiscounted fee and securing marketing investment. If you'd like to listen to that series, I can hook you up with those links, albeit that they're private. You do have to be a subscriber of Real Estate Rockstar, and I am trusting you. And of course, if you're a competitor of this company, which is in the Bay of Plenty, I can't allow you to have those recordings. But of course, if you're anyone else, you know that I'd be more than happy to hook you up with them. So just send me a text and I'll send you links to look at those recordings. And there's lots of information around there that can rehone and sharpen your skills around fee negotiation and securing marketing investment. Last but by no means least in this list, you also want to make sure that you are presenting your specific buyers, not with contact details or otherwise, but you do need to talk to these sellers about buyers that you have ready to look at their property. This is far more than doing a buyer match. There's good communication that we'll be giving you that can go with this. It's absolutely imperative that they can lock onto this and see evidence for a couple of reasons. One is I want to completely mitigate any chance of your competitor getting into their ear and talking about an off-market listing. I want to show that you can do it as well. But I also want to clear up and get across that which we talk about inside the Property Sellers Research Guide when we say finding a buyer is the easy part and we already have buyers. I've conceded many, many times to sellers that no, they don't necessarily have to pay for ads because we are a real estate agency, and yes, we already have access to buyers, but finding a buyer is an easy part. The question is, when the buyer comes, how do we manage their perception of value on your property? And that's why we need to engage the marketing question. I hope this has made a lot of sense. I'll bang on about this. I just want to clarify before we jump off what you've been doing, hopefully in October. And if you haven't been doing it, get onto it right now, is building your active property seller list to at least 25 plus. You now are presented with the idea of disseminating which of those are before Christmas, which of those are after. This will tell you how you need to service them with the passive contacts and those 9 steps where it needs to be spread if they're after Christmas, or contracted if they're going to be before Christmas. Make sure that you're on the phone to these people regularly. You're having at least 5 good quality conversations a week. I'll definitely be talking about this subject matter next week as to what you should be talking about, and just get that. And it is a process in play, those 9 steps to building a representation of your product and the value that it presents, so that you are able to list these properties successfully, list and sell through Nocember, have a great break, a great end of year, and then start the new year with an absolute bang. My name's Mark Dwyer. You can contact me at Mark with a K at realestaterockstar.com.au, or feel free to telephone me on +61 410 592 165. Welcome to Nocember. Welcome to top end productivity, and welcome to being a real estate rock and roller.